The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome and thank you for attending the Colorado Dental Board's stakeholder meeting via webinar today. And I should add that the date is September 23rd, 2020, and the time is 9:01 a.m. Before we get started, my apologies for my phone. Before we get started, we would like to introduce the staff members from the Division of Professions and Occupations that are present. My name is Darcy Magnuson, and I am a regulatory analyst with the division. Also attending is Yukon Morford, director, and Elena Kemp, regulatory coordinator. We also have Jenny Alber, senior program director. We will be facilitating this stakeholder meeting. In compliance with the governor's orders regarding COVID-19, the division has transitioned to a platform that is 100% virtual, and we appreciate your flexibility. As many of you have been to DORA stakeholder meetings before, we would like to reiterate the importance of your comments today. DORA makes decisions every day that may affect your life and your business. Your input is vital in the rulemaking process. Throughout this process, our goal is to create regulations that clarify and explain legislation, ensure minimum competency to enter and continue to practice, and provide only what is absolutely necessary for consumer protection without creating unnecessary barriers to the marketplace. Your input will be part of the information that goes to the board as it considers adopting new and revised rules. More specifically, we'll be discussing revisions to the rules that are proposed following the mandatory rule review, which is required to assess the continuing need, appropriateness, and cost effectiveness of the board's rules to determine if the rules should be continued in their current form, modified, or repealed. The implementation of Colorado House Bill 201326, which is endorsements or creation of the Occupational Credential Portability Program. Senate Bill 20102, patient disclosures regarding sexual misconduct, and Senate Bill 19079, which is a bill that requires practitioners to prescribe controlled substances electronically, the rules have to be implemented but won't take effect for another couple of years until 2023. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the website at a later date. As the stakeholder meeting is held solely by webinar, please raise your hand using the hand icon if you would like to speak, and we will unmute your line so you will be heard by everyone. Or you can type your comment in the question section and we will read it aloud. For anyone that is planning to provide comments, please state your name and who you represent. Feel free to provide either general comments on the rule changes or specific comments on the proposed language. Keep your comments limited to 3 to 5 minutes or less, and try not to repeat something that was already said. Stating you're in full agreement with someone else works just fine and will be noted. If you're using audio through your computer, please remember to put any phones on vibrate or turn them off. And whether you are using computer or phone audio, try to keep background noises to a minimum when speaking. So at this point in time, we'll walk through each. Elena has the draft rules showing on the screen. And so we'll walk through each of the proposed changes and take comments on the specific changes instead of jumping back and forth throughout the rules. So Rule 1.1, I'll just explain where this came from. So the purpose of this, for those of you who have attended before, have already heard this, is to format the rules to match the guidelines that are set forth in the Secretary of State formatting recommendations. So 1.1 is the authority for the rules. Any questions, comments, concerns on that? Kimberly Marshall, I see that your hand is raised. It's been raised since before the meeting, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you if you want to speak at all. You're self-muted. I'm not seeing that you're unmuting, so I'm going to go ahead and mute you again and lower your hand. If you want to speak, let me know. I don't see any other hands raised. Rule 1.1 is pretty straightforward, so I didn't anticipate that. 1.2, same thing. This is just in compliance with the Secretary of State filing manual. Any questions, comments, concerns on Rule 1.2? 1.3, applicability. 1.4 is definitions. MU 1.5, formerly 1.2, financial responsibility exemptions. MU 1.6, formerly 1.3, licensure of dentists and dental hygienists. Okay, we have a hand raised. Alyssa Aberley, sorry if I mispronounced your name. You're unmuted.
Thanks. It's Aberly, but that's okay.
Sorry.
We had submitted some suggestions in writing as well, but I think it's later in this rule where it talks about original licensure for dental hygienists. We have had a few people reach out to us that are applying for licenses in Colorado, and they've reached out to Dora as well and still felt confused. So then they reached out to our organization. I'm with the Colorado Dental Hygienists Association. Sorry about that. And it seems like there's two sections. One, it doesn't say that it's for original licensure by examination, but I guess that's assumed because it doesn't say by endorsement. And then the second is by endorsement. And both sections say that you can prove clinical competency via several methods. And one method in each of those sections is by having practiced a certain number of hours or years in the past. So in one section, and I listed it in our submission, it's section E3B under this rule. It states that you can prove your clinical competency by working at least 1 year of the last 5 years. And then in section F5A under endorsement, it says that you can prove your clinical competency by working a minimum of 300 hours per year for a minimum of 1 year of the last 3 years. And that seems to be a little confusing because they're in conflict with each other. And so people are just wondering, is it really one of the last 3 years or one of the last 5 years? And if we can try to make those two sections align. I'm guessing at some point one of them changed and then the other section just didn't also get changed. The requirements for dentists to prove clinical completely different. It just seems like these two sections potentially should align. And I had been emailing UConn a little bit about this as well, but it seems that under the application by examination, you're proving your clinical competency by taking an examination. And so it seems a little counterintuitive that the hours worked would even be under that section, but.
Thank you. In your written comments, did you provide suggestions on how you think it should look?
We just feel like they should be aligned. So whichever one the board feels is more appropriate would be okay as they aligned. Applicant has worked one of the last 5 years, but has not worked one of the last 3 years. And so she's wondering which one really is he needs to have done in order to be able to get a license.
Okay, that's helpful. You don't have a preference for either one. You just want them to be the same, so it's not confusing.
Correct.
Okay. Anything else from you on this one?
I think that's it for that rule. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, actually, there is one more item. Sorry. I realize it's in the same rule under the newly revised endorsement through the Occupational Credential Portability Program, which is Section F. The addition says the practice of dentistry, and in that section it should say the practice of dental hygiene. I think it got copied from the dentist section.
Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and mute you on our end and then lower your hand in case you want to speak later. Anyone else on this section, this rule, I should say? Jennifer Goodrum, I am your, oh, I just muted you. You're unmuted on your end. Now let me see if it's going to catch up. There we go. You're unmuted.
Perfect. Thank you. So yeah, thanks. We had a couple comments in this section. One was the one Alyssa just pointed out around practice of dental hygiene. So good catch, Alyssa. I think, so one of the other things in Rule 1.6 was in the continuing education section, which is section G. So it's right after the section F. In both section 7 and 9 of Rule 1.6G, there's continued concern among the profession at this point about I think dental, and I don't want to speak on dental hygiene, but I believe it's reflected there as well, that there has been no provision made in either the emergency rules that the board's considered or in these rules about course delivery format during COVID. And that's created some ongoing frustration just because people want to comply with the requirements in this rule, but I know there's been challenges being able to access in-person format BLS and CPR, as well as courses, just given the restrictions on public gatherings and things like that at this point. And so we had provided in the past some sample language, and we can re-provide that following this hearing, but I know that I believe at least one other board, I think the optometry board, has adopted just kind of a blanket statement saying the board can grant hardship exceptions around CE, course delivery and things like that during a license renewal period that includes a public health emergency. So something like that may be worth considering, kind of unless the board's going to do something in the emergency rulemaking space in the immediate future. So I can provide, that language again, but, some kind of hardship exception that they could do on a broad basis in the, for a license period that includes a public health emergency may be helpful. Just give them the flexibility to make adjustments in a situation like the one we're in right now. So I do know that CE delivery and as people are working to try to comply, moving forward here with both that and the BLS is a big concern in the profession. The other thing I had in Rule 1.6 is in Section A. It was right at the beginning of the rule. It's just a technical question there. I'll let you get up there. Okay, there we are. So A, I believe it should be actually 2. It's the second one that appears here. You guys added here that you can serve, notice by first-class mail or electronic mail to the last address of record. But then the last sentence says service by mail shall be deemed sufficient and proper upon a license or applicant. I wondered there if you should say if there needs to be a reference to email since you've added it in the sentence above. So in that last sentence, whether it would be mail or email, the last sentence of Section 2 there. So that was just a question for you guys as to whether that needed to be there for your purposes. And then the Section 3 numbering there, just wanted to say thanks for considering that addition. We do think that'll help, hopefully, remind licensees that they need to register with the PDMP if they have a DEA license. I think that'll be helpful just to call attention to it one more time. So we appreciate that.
Thanks, Jennifer. And yeah, that language, if for the hardship, it would be helpful unless you took the words out of my mouth. Optometry is the board that did adopt that at their hearing in May. So if you want a specific language for the board to consider, you're welcome to send that in. Otherwise, we could use the same language from optometry. So either one.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll send a suggestion, but I don't think we're necessarily tied to, any specific approach. I think the profession's just really begging for some clarity around how they can comply with the requirements at this point in a meaningful way. So,
yeah. Okay, that sounds good. I'm going to go ahead and place you back on mute and lower your hand in case you want to speak again as we move through the rules.
Thank you.
Anyone else on this? I'm going to scroll through and see if I see any raised hands. I'm not seeing any, so I think it's fair to move on to the next rule. Elena, if you think of something, you're welcome. We can always jump back if need be. Okay, license presentation, formerly Rule 1.4, now 1.7. No substantive changes here other than putting the statutory authority for the rule at the beginning and changing the history of the rule removing it from the beginning, putting it at the end. New Rule 1.8 was Rule 1.5. Practice and education and research programs. Added language in A3. And Jenny pointed out, Jenny Albert, director, that there is a draft policy that the board will review at the next meeting covering public health emergencies. She said it was discussed at the last meeting as well about that, so that touches base on what Jennifer Goodrum's comments were. I apologize, I was not at the last meeting. I was out on leave, so thank you, Jenny, for that.
Yeah, my apologies. I got booted off the system, so I just had to jump back on.
Other general cleanup, as you can see on the screen right now. Uh, 1.9 record keeping requirements. Hold on a second, Elena, there's a hand raised, so let me jump over there. Alyssa, I am yourself muted. No, we're good to go.
Thank you. So in this section, record keeping requirement, we did also in writing, we submitted this comment, but the terminology under section C uses exam and examination rather than evaluation, and they're referring to CDT codes and their descriptions, and the CDT code uses the term evaluation. So we're just recommending that these sections get updated to reflect the actual terminology used by the American Dental Association.
Okay, thank you for that. Anything else on this one?
Nope, that's it.
All righty.
Hi, this is Elena. I just want to make sure I captured your comment correctly. You wanted to be consistent with what was the board that the last stakeholder just referenced? Or
The ADA, right? The American Dental Association, I believe.
oh, okay. Thank you.
But we can clarify that, and we will plug in the written comments as well. Alyssa said yes, the CDT code, which is developed by the American Dental Association. Thank you for that. So here is Senate Bill 19079 language. Any comments on that? And here's the bulk of the new rule for Senate Bill 19079. Jennifer Goodrum, I see your hand is raised. You're unmuted on our end. You're good to go.
Sure, thanks. So I think one question's come up, I think, as our as a dentist, sorry, this is Jennifer Goodrum on behalf of the Colorado Dental Association. We've had one question come up as we've discussed this section with dentist, and it's in the bottom of section A. So that temporary technological failure is actually an exception to having to electronically prescribe. But the way it's stated, the very bottom of that section A says that a virus has put patient data and transmission at risk for at least 48 hours or 2 consecutive business days. So the way that reads right now, it could be read as you're supposed to keep e-prescribing during the first 48 hours that you know you have a computer virus. And I think that could be, I mean, that would probably be a HIPAA violation among other things if somebody were to continue to do that, and would really potentially compromise the patient's data. So that may need a little bit of work. I'm not sure exactly what the intent is, but it seems like if a virus impacts the system, it should be, electronic prescribing should be discontinued immediately.
Okay, thank you. On 1.10, minimum standards for qualifications, training, and education for unlicensed personnel, exposing patients to ionizing radiation. One 1.11, laboratory work order forms. Jennifer Goodrum, one second. You are unmuted on our end.
Hey, Darcy, it's Jennifer Goodrum with the Dental Association again. I actually had something hit me as we went through section 1.10, so the radiation training. The CDPHG recently adopted a rectangular collimation requirement for dental x-ray systems, dental oral x-ray systems. And I mean, I need to talk to the Dental Association. I've not had a chance to really vet that with them. But I do wonder if maybe we want to add as part of kind of the itemized training things, something around rectangular collimation. That requirement doesn't take effect for a few years, so it may not be appropriate to add quite yet. But I mean, we can always do it a date limited, on or after, you know, X date. Some training around rectangular collimation in terms of, because if there's error there, it can result in increased exposure to the patient. So I think there's some itemized things in here at this rule that it actually talks about that there needs to be training on. So that may be something to look at in that section. I will follow up with them and actually submit some written comments if that's something that, and kind of telling, you know, suggesting language if that's something that they believe is appropriate at this point. So just remembered that that was added.
Okay, that's helpful. We have a written comment from Brian Seacrest. If you have students from Warren Tech that are under the age of 18, how are they going to get experience in taking x-rays? Warren Tech, if still in operation, is a JEFCO program through JEFCO schools. Thank you. .12 denture construction by assistants and unlicensed technicians. .13 limited prescriptive authority for dental hygienists. .15 pediatric case management and protective stabilization. .16 infection control. Two hands raised, so pause here. Alyssa, I'm unmuting you. You're unmuted.
Thank you. This is Alyssa Aberly, Colorado Dental Hygienists Association, and we submitted in writing just kind of support support. I know the Colorado Dental Association had previously suggested an addition to this section, and we submitted the same wording that they had previously submitted to include any currently applicable CDC or OSHA guidelines on infection control in dental settings. This rule currently references the 2003 and 2016 CDC guidelines, but obviously right now there are frequently updated infection control guidelines. And so we want to make sure that any currently applicable guidelines are also being followed and enforced. So we're supporting their previous suggestion.
Okay. And you do, to incorporate by reference, you do have to specify, so that's why there's 2003 and 2016, so it would have to be the date of the current, the statute is very specific on incorporation by reference, so that's something that the board will have to look at.
Yeah, and
so
I think I remember that was kind of the board's conversation of why they're hesitant to put something in here, but right now, obviously those documents aren't like formal documents that have a certain date on them because they are being updated frequently, but some people feel that they don't need to be following them because they weren't in the 2016 guidelines, even though they're very pertinent right now.
Okay. All right. Jennifer Goodrum, I unmuted you.
Thanks. This is Jennifer Goodrum on behalf of the Colorado Dental Association. Melissa stated well what our comments were in that section, and perhaps we can look at submitting some written comments that address Karen McGovern's comment that get to a little bit more the specifics. I don't know. I mean, another option may be, I don't know if you would have a way to write this section such that the dental board maybe could adopt some additional policy that's a little bit more responsive to like situation like a public health emergency or something like that. So maybe that would be an option to address it, but I don't know if you've given yourself enough flexibility in the rule to do that. So we'll brainstorm some options and hopefully submit some things in writing.
Okay, and I mean, the other option, I assume that the guidelines are long. The other option is to pull the language that's pertinent and relevant out of the CDC and put it directly into rule. The problem, like Jennifer, with incorporation by reference is anytime the guideline changes, then you have to update the rule. So it's kind of a tricky area. So whatever suggestions that you have on that, I think that would be helpful because I certainly hear your concern.
Yeah, and I think that is fair around the whole incorporation by reference. I mean, and that is a very long document. The challenge is those are changing by the month right now, and so I don't know how you keep your standards up to date with them, and you don't want to be behind. So that's where I was like, I don't know if there's a way to adopt it in policy or something, or put in here, language that during a public health emergency, the board may adopt through policy or something like that, additional standards that come out or something like that. So I'll play with language and we'll send you guys some suggestions there.
Okay, thank you. Uh, 1.17 advertising. 1.18, protocol upon revocation, relinquishment, suspension, or cessation of practice of a dental or dental hygiene license. One 1.20, compliance with board subpoena, which will need to clean up the rules. 1.19 1.21, declaratory orders. It looks stuck up. Finding schedule for violations of the Dental Practice Act and board rules. 1.24, use of lasers. We have a hand raised. Alyssa, hold on 1 second. You are unmuted on, you're good to go.
Thank you. This is Alyssa Averly, Colorado Dental Hygienists Association. We are actually recommending to omit the added section, letter F. The Colorado Dental Association and us had a task force regarding lasers back when these rules were originally written, and a few of the people from that task force have reached out to express concern about this section. First of all, there's no research or literature that states water needs to be used during laser procedures, and most laser units do not have a water reservoir. So by specifying what standards the water lines or water needs to meet in this section seems redundant, because water line standards are addressed in CDC guidelines, which are under the infection control rule. So as those standards get updated or changed, we would be changing it in multiple places rather than just updating the infection control rule. So we're recommending that this addition is omitted.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and mute your line. And Jennifer Goodrum, I've unmuted you. All right,
Thank you.
you're good to go.
Yep, perfect. This is Jennifer Goodrum on behalf of the Colorado Dental Association. I'll echo a lot of Alyssa's comments there. Definitely, at best, this section needs a lot more discussion before we, and around the specific language that's used, as well as kind of the need for it. I didn't see any note from the board as kind of what the rationale was around the addition. Is there a patient safety concern driving it? Is it a bunch of cases or just an outlier case, something like that, that might be a driving need? Also, I mean, the way it's constructed, it actually says dental units, including lasers. So there'd be a question there as to, is this broader than just lasers that we're looking at? And I mean, in that case, I think Alyssa's right. There's probably some other standards of practice, CDC and otherwise, that address kind of what's required, and the placement might not be appropriate. If it's broader than lasers, this is in the laser rule, and if we're talking about dental units broader than lasers, the placement may not actually be appropriate. We've also gotten a ton of questions just already from the folks that have been involved in the space, like around the sterile water requirement or sterile saline, sterile water. They've asked about, I mean, are we talking about when it goes into the laser or when it exits the laser? Because I think there are some standards around sterile water use. It's sterile when it's in its original container and tubing, but once it leaves that, it's no longer considered sterile. So even if you have to put it in the reservoir for the laser, and I'm not an expert in this space, but what I'm being told is at the point you put it into the actual piece of equipment, it's no longer considered sterile. And so I think we'd need to be very careful moving forward about how that is framed. So, I mean, just in terms of practicality and people's ability to even begin to try to comply. I also understand some units require distilled water per manufacturer standards, and saline sterile water is probably incompatible with those units. So there, it sounds like there's a lot, and we can put some of this in writing for you guys so you have a little bit more background. There are a lot of moving pieces to actually even create a rule that people could comply with in this space. And we've already gotten a whole lot of questions as to what this means. I think it's probably not as clear as it would need to be for the profession. I think, I mean, a part of you guys talked about, this rule process is really around kind of need appropriateness, cost effectiveness, trying to simplify, reduce regulation, and clarify. And I'm not sure that right now that this brings clarity for the profession. So in current form, it definitely needs major work before it would move forward, and probably makes sense to pull out until we are able to have that discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
(1.29) confidential agreements to limit practice of, if there's a typo there, of physical or mental illness. I think it should be 4. Sorry, I think the R was left off. And Rule 1.30, new rule for legislative implementation. Alrighty, and so the last thing here is Appendix A, which is part of the new rule regarding the disclosure. It's the sample disclosure statement. Jennifer and Alyssa, I'll start with Alyssa again. You're unmuted.
Thank you. This is Alyssa Aberly. I'm the Dental Hygienist Association. Kind of a administrative thing. I'm sure it happened on your end somewhere in this process, but the statute did get updated on September 14th with the changes from House Bill 1056 from last legislative session. And so a lot of these new references to statute that refer to the Dental Practice Act have changed. And so just to make sure that all those get renumbered since everything got moved around in the Practice Act.
And you're referencing the non-substantive reorganization of the Dental Practice Act?
Correct.
That's the bill. Okay. Yeah, so the plan is that that can be done through a correction filing with the Secretary of State. And so to not confuse this process, what will happen is the board will go through and make whatever changes the board wants to through this rulemaking process. And then once those rules are final, then we'll go in and do the non-substantive correction of all of those statutes throughout, similar to House Bill 191172. So we just didn't want to cause any more confusion, but thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, I get that. Some people had submitted like each individual citation that were incorrect. I was like, oh no, we don't need to get into that, but I just wanted to make sure.
Hey, I'll take it. No, I'm just, no, that's helpful. And Jennifer, I don't know if you lowered your hand, but if you wanted to add anything else, just raise your hand again. So I don't see any more written questions and any more hands raised. So I'll pause for a minute or so before we wrap up the meeting in case anyone else wants to say anything, any final thoughts. I want to make sure we have given everyone an opportunity to provide feedback on the proposed changes before we wrap up the meeting. I see Jennifer. Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. I don't see any more questions or comments or hands raised. So thank you for participating in today's meeting. The stakeholder comments and program recommendations will be presented prior to the emergency and permanent rulemaking hearing, which is tentatively scheduled for November 5th, 2020. Please remember, I know some of you talked about submitting additional written comments. You can send those to the email address that's listed on all the notices, and we will make sure those are incorporated and given to the board in advance of the hearing. That concludes the stakeholder meeting. Thank you again for your participation, and I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar at this point in time.